And the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable to you, O Lord. I told you, that's a doozy, right? Sisters and brothers, the general theme of these three readings that we had this week are about community. How important it is that we have one another, because together we are able to course correct ourselves. We are able to focus our attention on the truth of God. None of us, as Paul likes to say, I don't know, God knows. None of us knows the true extent of God's love for us, God's love for the world. And that is the reason why Jesus calls us together into community, so that together we can figure it out. There are ways in which all of us stray from the love of God. Many of those ways, as pointed out in the psalm, are things that we are not ourselves aware of. By coming together, by being able to observe one another, by being able to focus on God's love together, we're able to give ourselves a sort of compass. The community of Christ, the community of God's children, is vitally important for that reason. And it is also vitally important, Jesus tells us, for that community of Christ to be focused on truth. And so when Jesus says in Mark that it is better for you to cut off your hand, to cut off a leg, to pluck out an eye, I think it's important that we realize that he is talking about a particular type of sin. The person who was going around healing people in Jesus' name, Jesus didn't have a problem with that. He didn't have a problem with that because that person, even though they were not a part of their particular community, was doing the good work. He was preaching the truth. He was sharing the truth with others, helping them to focus on God's love. But when we allow a message of hate, when we allow messages of exclusion to enter into our communal conversation, then the entire community becomes the problem. When we allow misinformation to saturate itself into the community that's supposed to course correct us, how are we supposed to know up from down, left from right? Where is our North Star when we are lost? And this is the reason why Jesus says it is so important for us to try to hold to the truth. We are living through a time where we are more aware of misinformation than we have been in a very long time. There has always been misinformation within the world. Jesus talks at length about it. Goodness gracious, one of my favorite people to read about misinformation is Machiavelli. If Machiavelli likes lying, oh my gosh, you don't want to listen to that guy. But he speaks from the position of a politician, a political leader. He says you are going to be more effective as a leader if you trick people into believing what you want. You're going to be more effective if you get entire groups of people to believe in the lies that you say. Just repeat them over and over and over again until they think that it is true. Like Napoleon being short. Napoleon was not short for his time, but all the propaganda about him being short makes it so we all believe it now. We all believe it to the point where if you think of an evil villain, you think of a short guy. The way in which misinformation can cement itself into a community, honestly, is quite alarming. And so when we, as a community of Christ, try to commit ourselves to following the path of Christ, we are actually undertaking something that's pretty dang difficult. We are trying to be conscious of the mistruths that exist in our lives. We are trying to weed them out. We are trying to find something that brings us closer to the truth of God. And so we as Christians exist in an interesting time, because we are living in a time where so much of the Christian community has decided that we don't need to do this work. We don't need to seek the truth. We know the truth. We don't need to challenge ourselves to point out, to seek to identify evil within the world, because we have surrounded ourselves with everything that is good. That deeply undermines the message of Jesus Christ. That deeply undermines the work in which Jesus tells us that we are put here in the world to do. We are here to try to create a community that can be like a clean heart to the world, that can speak about love and can speak about bettering ourselves, can speak about a community where all people are included. One of the things, I don't think this is Machiavelli, but for some reason I got it when I was reading him, that is the most dangerous type of lie isn't the lie that mixes the truth into it. The most dangerous type of lie is the type of lie that you want to hear. And I think that Jesus understood that on a very deep and a very personal level. As he combated the lies of the temple in his time, he understood that the rulers of his age knew what the people wanted. They were willing to give it to them. They were willing to feed into their vices, their sins, and their anger and their fears. They were willing to bring out the worst in them so that they could maintain control over them. This is the reason why Jesus comes down so hard on those type of leaders. This is the reason why Jesus says it's better to put a millstone around your neck and to throw yourself into the sea, because you're not just damaging yourself. You're not just damaging another person. You're damaging the communities that we rely upon to try to better ourselves within the world. So whether or not you agree with that language that he uses or not, I think that there is an important message embedded in there. And I think it is something that speaks very true to us here today, because we are in the middle of the repercussions of what those type of lies can do. And they are present here in Vermont as well. When we talk about the homeless community, for instance, we are constantly hearing about how they are a threat to public safety. And yes, it is true that there are threats to public safety that are happening in the Burlington area, but the homeless community, for instance, very often are the victims of that lack of security. And yet, there are so many voices that choose to villainize them. We live with this misinformation in our lives. We don't necessarily think about that misinformation in our lives. Jesus tells us to be conscious, to rely upon each other, to point out when we are doing things that are wrong to each other so that we can correct each other and live better. When our communities are rooted in love, we have the ability to see what we're doing wrong through the eyes of others. But if all of us believe in lies, in mistruths, in misinformation, how are we able to get better? How can we rely upon each other to get better? Amen.